Darius Mitchell sat alone in his oversized office, staring out at the city skyline as the sun dipped below the horizon. From this height, the busy streets looked peaceful, but inside him, things were far from calm. He had built his empire from scratch, coding late into the night in a cramped apartment, making one smart investment after another, and taking risks that others deemed impossible. Now, in his mid-40s, he owned cutting-edge technology companies and held swaths of property across the nation. People often called him a genius or a visionary, but deep inside he felt a quiet emptiness. Behind every congratulatory handshake, he sensed a question in people's minds. How much of you is real and how much is just money? He remembered the early days when his grandmother had encouraged him to smile at strangers, to speak with kindness, and to keep his heart open. She had lived in that small apartment with him during his first year of launching a startup, supplying endless bowls of chicken soup and words of encouragement when he doubted himself. One evening, after he had suffered a series of setbacks, losing an important investor and watching the app he built crash on launch day, he had slumped onto their worn couch, head in his hands. His grandmother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said, "Money can fill pockets, but it cannot fill a heart that wants to feel something true. Never forget who you are." Years later, her voice still echoed in his mind whenever he felt the weight of isolation. He had climbed so high, yet genuine connections had slipped through his fingers. At parties held in grand mansions, he would arrive in a sleek black car, greeted by a host of eager faces. They would introduce themselves with practiced smiles, asking about his businesses and offering to toast his success. Darius would smile back, but each compliment felt like a mask for greed. He had learned to recognize the way people's eyes lit up not at his jokes or his ideas, but at the rumors of his wealth. And though he enjoyed giving speeches at conventions and sharing his thoughts on innovation, he longed for someone who would care about the man behind the titles. He tried trusting a few friends, but it was hard for them to separate him from the wealth and power that defined his public life. Once, he sent a simple text to a colleague inviting him for coffee at a local cafe. The colleague arrived late, then spent half the meeting discussing how he might partner with Darius's ventures. Another time, a woman he dated made grand statements about love and loyalty, yet weeks later, she confessed that she was drawn to his influence and the opportunities his name offered her family. Each time, Darius felt his heart shrink a little. He wondered if he would ever know someone who saw him simply as a man, not as a walking ledger. One quiet Saturday afternoon, he wandered through a local farmer's market under the guise of enjoying fresh produce. He slipped on a plain black baseball cap and sunglasses, hoping to go unnoticed. This simple change in appearance made a startling difference. Vendors greeted him as if he were any other customer. He smiled as he sampled cheese and held a stalk of fresh asparagus, speaking to the farmers about their recipes. For a moment, he felt free and alive in a way he had not experienced in years. No one asked for his business card. No one whispered about his next big deal. At that moment, he resolved to find out if he could experience more of this freedom. Could he meet someone who would see past his name and fortune and simply like him for being Darius? No wealth attached? Back in his office that evening, he tapped on his keyboard and closed the lid on his laptop. He thought of his grandmother's words again. She had always believed people would be drawn to the sincerity of one's heart. He asked himself, how could he find authentic connection? The idea formed in his mind, growing bolder with each passing second. He would go on a blind date, but not as himself. He would strip away every sign of wealth, no tailored suit, no luxury car, no mansion address. He would pose as someone ordinary, someone who worked hard every day, yet lived simply. In that disguise, he would meet a person who cared about him, not his bank balance. The next morning, Darius called his longtime assistant Carla into his study. Carla had been with him since before the first big round of funding, so she knew his routines better than anyone. He explained in quiet but clear terms that he wanted complete confidentiality. "I need your help to set up a date," he said, his voice steady but determined. "I want to meet her as someone else, a janitor or someone who works in maintenance. No one can know who I really am." Carla looked at him, puzzled at first. but then she nodded. She only knew fragments of what he was asking. Darius had never done anything like this before. He stressed that this was not a business meeting, it was personal. He needed to feel something genuine. Carla hesitated before asking, "Are you sure about this, Mr. Mitchell? You know how people talk. If someone finds out, the story could get out." Darius smiled wryly. "Let them talk," he replied. "If I don't try, I'll always wonder." He explained that he would adopt a simple name, Marcus Jones, and would wear a janitor's uniform. He wanted Carla to arrange everything, a location, a time, and a way to ensure that no one from his world would be present. Carla, knowing how much this meant to him, agreed to organize the details. Over the next few days, Carla made quiet phone calls to friends and acquaintances in a neighborhood far from Darius's usual haunts. She found the name of a young woman who lived there, a waitress named Tiana, who worked part-time at a small diner and studied creative writing at night. She asked a mutual friend if Tiana might be interested in a blind date. The friend agreed to introduce her to someone who would pay attention to her dreams, not her hourly wages. Carla instructed him to say her date was a hard worker with a heart of gold. By keeping the details vague, Carla protected Darius's identity. Meanwhile, Darius began preparing his disguise. He went to a local thrift store in a part of town where he was unknown. He spent hours trying on nondescript clothes, plain black slacks, an inexpensive janitor's shirt with a small collar, and a pair of scuffed work shoes. He bought a simple cleaning cart, complete with a mop and bucket, and a set of cheap rubber gloves. He even purchased a name tag printed with Marcus Jones, the name he would use. For an extra layer of anonymity, he acquired a box of tempera paint to darken his fingertips and knuckles so people might believe he spent hours scrubbing floors. He practiced a slouched posture in front of a full-length mirror, reminding himself never to stand tall as the powerful CEO he truly was. Each day he rehearsed under his breath a story about working as a janitor in a midtown office building. He told himself to speak softly, to avoid big words, and to keep his hands busy, sweeping, mopping, wiping down counters, even though those motions felt foreign to him. He bought a second-hand toolbox and stocked it with mundane items, a screwdriver, a rag, a simple wrench. In his mind, he became Marcus, a man who rose before dawn, who caught a city bus to a building in need of cleaning, and who did not own property or lead shareholders in a boardroom. For the first time in years, he imagined life without layers of power and expectation. Though he was eager, Darius also felt nervous. He wondered if Tiana would see through his act. He worried about every detail. Would his hands betray him? Would he use the wrong phrase that only a wealthy man would know? The more he thought, the more his palms sweated. Yet he also felt a spark of excitement, curiosity about how it would feel to be just another person, to dine with someone who had no idea he was a billionaire. He longed to laugh freely, to open his heart without fearing that someone would only value him for what he had. One evening, after another long workday, Darius called Carla again. He asked her to confirm the date and time. Carla replied that everything had been set. The date was Friday at 7 o'clock at a simple diner called Sunshine Diner, located in a quiet neighborhood. Carla whispered the address over the phone and reminded him again to be sure that no one recognized him. "No fancy car," she said. "Just take a taxi or drive a different car." Darius hung up, his heart thumping with anticipation. He closed his eyes and pictured himself arriving at the diner in a battered sedan, stepping out as Marcus Jones, the humble public servant. On the morning of the date, Darius woke before dawn. He opened the closet where he kept his tailored designer suits but ignored them. Instead, he pulled out the plain uniform he had bought, now freshly washed and ready. He donned the black slacks, slipped into the scuffed work shoes, and buttoned the cheap shirt. He pinned on the Marcus Jones name tag, double-checked the cleaning cart and tools, and studied his reflection. He looked at the darkened paint on his hands, making sure it appeared natural. He practiced his slouched posture once more, feeling the weight of the costume, both figuratively and literally, as the uniform hung slightly loosely over his broad frame. Darius stepped into a modest rental car Carla had arranged, a nondescript older model that he would not be seen driving in his daily life. He set his phone to silent mode and placed it in the glove box. As he slid into the driver's seat, his chest tightened with nerves. He had typed out a simple script for himself, answers to questions about his life, his family, his hopes. But he knew he could not predict everything she might ask. The stars had barely faded when Marcus Jones stepped into the fluorescent glow of Sunshine Diner. The door chimed softly behind him, and he paused for a moment to breathe in the familiar scents. The warm aroma of frying bacon, the sweet whiff of pancakes, and the faint tang of cleaning supplies from his cart. He nodded to the hostess, who smiled politely, assuming he was an employee. Marcus adjusted his uniform, a simple dark shirt stained near the collar and a pair of well-worn black trousers, before wheeling his cleaning cart toward the back corner of the dining area. Sunshine Diner was modest, with vinyl booths that had seen many customers over the years and formica tables showing faint scratch marks. The walls were painted a pale yellow, and a few framed photographs of the neighborhood's founding families hung crookedly above the booths. In the center, a long counter with chrome trim and round stools faced the kitchen's swinging doors. The hum of the old refrigerator in the corner blended with the soft hiss of the coffee machine. Marcus set down his mop bucket and stared out at the empty tables for a moment, running his gloved fingers along the handle of the mop to steady his nerves. He told himself to keep his posture relaxed, not too erect. He was supposed to look like someone who spent most of his shift bending over floors. A few regulars had already trickled in, an elderly man in a rumpled suit reading the morning paper, a young mother with a toddler tugging at her hand, and a middle-aged woman sipping coffee as she scrolled through her phone. All of them nodded, absently to Marcus as he began mopping the floor near the counter. He moved slowly, watching the swish of the mop break the reflection of the overhead lights on the linoleum. Each swipe of the mop felt deliberate, as if he were trying not only to clean the floor but to immerse himself in the persona he had crafted. A hard-working man whose pride came from a job well done. Around mid-morning, the diner grew busier. The elderly man flagged down the waitress to refill his coffee. The young mother called for her server when her son dropped his toy under the booth. Marcus continued to work in silence, unobtrusively, collecting empty plates from tables, carrying them to the dishwashing area, and wiping crumbs from corners. He seized every opportunity to catch a glimpse of the door, waiting for the friend who would introduce him to Tiana. It was close to noon, when the bell above the door rang again. A young woman walked inside, her curly hair tied back loosely, a worn tote bag slung over one shoulder. She glanced around briefly, scanning the diner for a seat or perhaps someone she recognized. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, and her shoes looked like they had walked many miles. She moved toward a booth near the window, where the natural light fell on her as if spotlighting her arrival. Marcus's heart fluttered at the sight of her. He knelt briefly to wring out his mop, and when he looked up again, she had already settled into the booth, folding her hands on the table and scanning the menu as if she were deeply interested in today's special. A moment later, another figure entered, Tiana's friend, the mutual acquaintance Carla had contacted. He waved at Tiana from a short distance and made his way behind the counter toward Marcus, as if they were two employees dropping by to check on things. In reality, he slipped behind the counter solely to navigate the back route and bypass any prying eyes. He would then catch Tiana's attention and indicate that she had someone waiting. Marcus watched with a steady gaze, sending every ounce of his attention to the unfolding moment. Tiana saw her friend and offered a warm smile. She looked around briefly and then spotted Marcus near the center table, mop in hand, as though he were performing some routine task. Their eyes met for just a second, and Marcus offered a small nod before returning to his sweeping. He kept his posture slightly slouched, as though he had been hunching over floors for hours, but in that instant, a flicker of recognition shivered through him. He saw something in her expression, a curious warmth that made his chest tighten. Her friend called her name softly and motioned toward the back corner. Tiana rose, smoothing her shirt as she walked across the floor. When she reached Marcus, she asked quietly, "Are you Marcus?" He paused, looking at her as though he had been concentrating on a particularly stubborn stain on the floor. He set down his mop and smiled gently. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Marcus." His voice was soft with a hint of huskiness earned by early morning shifts in dusty halls. "I was told I could help you." Tiana's eyes flicked to the mop bucket, then back to Marcus. A small laugh escaped her lips, a sound like invisible bells ringing in the quiet diner. "I appreciate it," she said, her tone friendly. "Thanks for letting me have this table." She carried herself with a modest confidence, straightening her back and brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Marcus extended a hand to help steady her as she pulled out the bench seat. He offered a polite nod and said, "I'll get this area cleaned up as soon as you're ready to order." She gave him a curious look, as if analyzing the way he stood, the way he spoke. Marcus kept his eyes steady, meeting hers with calm assurance. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll be careful not to splash anything while I mop. Let me know when you'd like to order." Tiana offered a short, distracted smile before returning to the menu. Her friend lingered behind, exchanging a few hushed words with Marcus before slipping away toward the entrance. Marcus knew that the friend's job was to stay visible until Tiana was settled, then slip out to leave the two of them alone. He took a final glance around the diner, checking for any messy tables left uncleaned. Satisfied, he returned to his cart and retrieved a clean cloth. He knelt down at a nearby table, wiping the sticky residue from spilled syrup and errant crumbs. The material of the cloth felt rough against his glove, and the vibrations of scrubbing reminded him briefly that this was not his accustomed world. He felt his mind beginning to wander as he worked, imagining himself in a boardroom making multi-million-dollar decisions, then scolded himself, refocusing on each swipe of the cloth until the surface gleamed. Several minutes passed before Tiana finally waved her hand, catching Marcus's attention. "Excuse me," she said when he approached, leaning forward slightly so her voice remained private. "Do you have a recommendation? I'm not sure what to get." Marcus straightened up, brushing lint from his shirt. He offered a calm smile. "Our pancakes are pretty popular, but plenty of people like the ham and eggs, and the coffee's fresh." He paused slightly and added, "If you're in the mood for something lighter, the turkey sandwich with a cup of soup is good." He watched her consider his suggestion, his pulse thudding in his temples. Tiana nodded, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "All right, I think I'll try the ham and eggs and a coffee, please." Beneath his uniform, a wave of relief washed over Marcus. He jotted down her order on a small notepad he kept tucked in his pocket, careful to maintain the pretense of a long shift already underway. As he turned to head toward the kitchen, he could sense her gaze lingering on his back. He felt almost naked under her scrutiny, but he forced himself to keep moving. Through the swinging kitchen doors, the clatter of silverware and sizzling of grease greeted him. Marcus found the cook flipping eggs on the griddle and calling out morning orders to the servers. He handed a crumpled piece of paper to the cook. "Ham and eggs, table 7, he said. The cook glanced up, nodded, and began assembling the plate. Marcus washed his hands at the sink, mindful of wiping off any trace of the darkened paint on his fingertips. When he emerged, the plate was ready. He cradled the tray carefully, his gloved hand steadying the edge as he walked toward Tiana's booth. He set the plate down before her with a measured calm. The ham was slightly crisp at the edges. The eggs lay sunny side up, the yolks bright as midday suns. The coffee came in a chipped ceramic mug that had likely been in the diner for years. Marcus refilled it before stepping back. "There you go," he said softly. "Let me know if you need anything else." As he moved to the next table, he caught her eyes again out of the corner of his vision. She lifted her mug in a small toast, and he smiled briefly before returning to his cleaning. Throughout the meal, Marcus found his gaze drifting back to Tiana. She ate with quiet satisfaction, savoring each bite and occasionally looking out the window at passers-by. When she positioned her napkin and leaned back, he seized the moment to pretend to sweep the corner near her table. Each time he swept within her peripheral view, he wondered if she noticed anything unusual. His gentle pauses when someone knocked on the door, his slight hesitation before speaking certain words. He chided himself quietly. Stay in character, Marcus. However, every time their eyes crossed, he wondered if she felt a spark of curiosity too. Meanwhile, Tiana studied him with a quiet fascination. She had expected just another date, a nervous man in a fancy suit chattering about his accomplishments. Instead, she found herself facing someone humble who treated every task, mopping, sweeping, wiping tables, with a sense of dignity. She watched the way his gloved hands moved deliberately over surfaces, as though he approached each chore with respect. She thought to herself that it was rare to see someone so unpretentious in his work. She flicked through her phone absently. Marcus finished wiping the last of the tables and leaned the mop against the wall, breathing in the comforting scent of freshly cleaned floor wax. The lunch rush had settled into a quiet lull. He glanced toward the kitchen door, hoping to catch a glimpse of Tiana lingering for a moment longer. To his surprise, she stood by the counter, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her tote bag. He felt a flutter in his chest, but he kept his posture relaxed and waited. She approached him with measured steps, as though she were stepping into a delicate moment. Marcus straightened his back, smoothing out the wrinkles in his uniform. He offered her a small nod of greeting. "Hi," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of curiosity. "Do you have a moment?" He smiled, setting aside his cleaning cloth. "Of course," he replied. "Is there something else you need?" Tiana hesitated, her eyes flicking between Marcus's face and the cleaning cart. I was wondering if you could tell me more about yourself," she said, her tone careful. Marcus blinked, surprised by the request. He collected his thoughts before answering. "Well, I work nights as a janitor at a few different buildings," he began, keeping his voice steady. "I try to keep busy, earn enough to pay rent and help my sister with her schooling. It isn't glamorous, but it's honest work." She nodded, folding her arms across her chest. "You seem to take pride in your work," she observed. "Most people would just clean and move on, but you've treated every task like it matters." Marcus's cheeks warmed at her words. He glanced down, thinking of the hours he spent scrubbing and wiping, of the satisfaction he felt when each surface gleamed. "I was taught that every job has value," he said quietly. "Even if people don't notice, it still needs to be done. And doing it well, it makes me feel like I've earned my place in the world." He met her gaze, and his brown eyes held an earnest glow. Tiana considered his words. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret. "You know, most people assume a dinner date means meeting someone who talks about big dreams, fancy trips, or career goals. But I feel like you believe in things that matter right now, like a clean floor for someone who needs a place to rest." She smiled, and Marcus felt a warmth spread through him. He realized that for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking of himself as a billionaire hiding behind a name tag. He was simply Marcus, a man whose work had meaning. She motioned toward a nearby booth, and they sat down together side by side on a cracked vinyl bench. Across from them, the booth's table held a few stray crumbs and a half-empty coffee mug, left by another customer. Marcus straightened and cleared the crumbs with his gloved hand, pressing a napkin gently across the tabletop. He looked up to find Tiana watching him. "I'm sorry," he said, searching for the right words. "I didn't realize you wanted to keep talking." Tiana shook her head. "No, please," she whispered. "I like hearing your story." She paused, as though gathering courage. "Do you always work alone?" Marcus considered her question. "Most of the time, yes," he replied. "At the office buildings, there aren't many of us at night. Sometimes I switch shifts with a few colleagues, but usually I just get in, do my work, and leave." He paused, telling himself to remain in character, but his mind briefly drifted to the plush office tower where he really oversaw hundreds of employees. He pushed that thought aside. "How do you manage so many different buildings?" Tiana asked, leaning forward. Marcus touched the brim of his baseball cap, tilting it slightly. "I plan out my routes," he explained. "I use a small notebook to mark where I need to be and when." I try to finish one building before heading to the next. If something comes up, like a spill or a broken window, I adjust my schedule. Sometimes I work through the night, other times I start in the early morning. It keeps me busy, but it's a good way to support my sister, and I learn new things all the time. Tiana's eyes lit up as she imagined his life waking before sunrise, navigating empty hallways with a mop in hand. She smiled softly, taking in the sincerity in his voice. "Your sister must be proud of you," she said. Marcus's face softened. "She is," he replied quietly. "She's in her second year of college now, studying nursing. I want her to have better opportunities than I did. I remember dropping out of high school to work because we needed money, but I promised her I'd find a way to help her finish." Tiana nodded, the corners of her eyes crinkling with empathy. "That's really admirable," she said. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat as he thought of the struggles he faced in his youth. The cramped apartment he shared with his sibling, the nights he stayed awake to help her with homework when he was exhausted from scrubbing floors. He saw in Tiana's gaze a reflection of the caring spirit he always admired in his grandmother. He wondered if she would ever care about him in the way his grandmother did, without reservation, without expectation of anything in return. The diner, around them, was nearly empty now. A few late customers sat at the counter, nurses from a nearby clinic taking a quick break, and a delivery driver sipping a cup of coffee before returning to his truck. The low hum of conversation filled the air in soft waves. Marcus shifted slightly, in his seat, aware of how quiet his mind felt when he was with Tiana. He took a breath and asked, "What about you? What brings you here every day?" Tiana ran her fingers along the seams of her blouse, capturing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I work here because I need to pay rent and save money for my writing classes," she said. "I've wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. I jot down ideas on napkins and scraps of paper whenever I have a free moment. Sometimes I stay up late typing stories, hoping to finish a book someday. But life is busy, and I need this job to keep going." She paused, revealing a small notebook tucked into her tote. "I have a few stories that people seem to like, but I'm still learning. I'd love to publish a collection of short stories. I want to tell stories about people, real people, so others can feel seen." Marcus felt his admiration deepen. He thought of his own success building companies, creating ventures that influenced thousands, yet he realized he had never done anything to fuel someone else's dreams in this way. He cleared his throat before answering. "I think that's incredible," he said. "Writing is important. When you write about things that matter, you help people understand the world and themselves a little better. I'd love to read your stories sometime." Tiana's eyes widened in surprise. "You'd really read them?" she asked, her voice brightening. Marcus nodded. "Yes, I love good stories. I grew up reading books to escape. If you ever need someone to read or help edit, I can do that." She smiled, and for a moment Marcus felt as though a door had opened between them, letting light spill into a space he kept locked for so long. As they talked, they discovered small connections. Both had a soft spot for old jazz records, the smell of coffee brewing in the early morning, and a memory of a single strawberry that tasted like summer. Marcus described the way he used to visit a tiny park as a child, where he dreamt of traveling the world. Tiana spoke of a teacher who encouraged her to write during a difficult time in high school. Each new detail drew them closer, weaving a tapestry of shared experiences and dreams. Time slipped by unnoticed until the bell above the door jingled, announcing a new customer. Marcus glanced over his shoulder and realized that it was nearly closing time for the diner. He felt a pang of reluctance when he thought of leaving this moment with Tiana behind. He stood, offering her a hand to help her rise. "It's almost closing time," he said quietly. "Is there anything else I can do for you before I finish?" Tiana stood, tucking her notebook into her tote. She considered the question for a moment, then shook her head. "No, thank you," she said. She stepped closer to him, placing a hand on his arm for a brief second. "I really enjoyed talking with you, Marcus. Thank you for being so honest." Marcus felt his heart swell. "Thank you for talking with me. he replied, his voice thick with emotion he dared not fully reveal. I'd love to see you again, if that's okay. Her smile was gentle and she tilted her head as though remembering something important. I'd like that, she said softly. But next time, can we talk outside of the diner? Maybe go for a walk or sit in the park? I feel like there's more to learn. Marcus nodded eagerly, his mind racing with ideas for their next meeting. Absolutely, he agreed. I know a nice park nearby. I can show you the roses my grandmother planted years ago. Tiana's smile widened and her eyes seemed to shine in the soft light. Then it's a date, she said. They exchanged a lingering look, a mixture of excitement and gentle hope in their gazes. Marcus felt as though the weight of his hidden life, the uniform, the role, had lifted for a moment. He would return to his work tonight as John the janitor, but he walked away feeling something he hadn't felt in years, the possibility of real connection. As Marcus pushed his cart toward the storage closet for the last time, he glanced back at Tiana stepping into the afternoon sunshine. He watched her walk down the sidewalk, the late-day light catching her hair. Inside him, the embers of something new and fragile began to glow. He returned to his mop bucket, knowing he would soon return to the world of concrete and steel where he truly belonged. Yet he carried with him the warmth of a conversation that felt home. Tiana walked home that day feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity mixed with calm joy. There was something about Marcus that didn't match the usual people she met. He wasn't loud or trying to impress her. He listened, more than he talked. He asked her about her writing, and when she spoke, he didn't look around the room or check a phone. He simply listened. That alone made him different. Still, something about him didn't quite add up. As she stepped into her small apartment, she kicked off her shoes, dropped her tote on the couch, and took out her notebook. She began writing not a story this time, but a list of things she noticed. He used gentle words. He didn't have rough hands like someone who mopped floors every day. His posture was straight, even when he tried to slouch. His shoes looked worn, but the way he walked felt practiced, almost like he was pretending. Tiana didn't want to believe he was lying. But as a writer, she had a sharp eye for small details. It was part of who she was, watching people, noticing what they didn't say, and writing it all down. She didn't want to think Marcus was hiding something. He had seemed so genuine, so kind. Still, her thoughts whispered doubts. She tried to ignore them. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe he just had good posture. Maybe he was nervous, and that's why he hesitated when answering questions. But later that evening, she took out the slip of paper he had left with her. It was just a small note he had scribbled a thank you on. At the bottom, she noticed something odd, a faint embossing that had pressed through the paper from something that must have been underneath when he wrote on it. She held it up to the light. The name, Darius M., could be seen in reverse. Her eyes widened. She opened her laptop and typed the name into the search bar. There he was. Photos, articles, business magazines, all featuring a tall man in expensive suits with a warm but serious smile. Darius Mitchell, billionaire tech entrepreneur, one of the richest men in the country. Her mouth fell open as she stared at the screen. She zoomed in on one of the pictures. It was him. Marcus was Darius. The kind janitor who offered coffee and conversation was actually one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. She sat back, stunned. Her heart raced, not with anger yet, but with confusion. Why would a billionaire pretend to be a janitor? Was it some sort of joke? A test, or was there more to the story? The next morning, she went to the diner like usual, but her thoughts weren't on the orders or the plates. She kept glancing at the door, wondering if he would walk in again. Part of her wanted to confront him right away, to ask him why he lied. Another part of her wanted to understand. What if he had a good reason? Later that afternoon, she got her chance. Marcus showed up, mop in hand, dressed in the same dark shirt and quiet shoes. He moved through the diner just like before, pretending to be a man who cleaned up messes and kept to himself. But this time, she couldn't see him the same way. Her heart ached with a mix of feelings, She walked over to him while he was mopping, near the back door. "Marcus," she said quietly. He looked up. For a second, his eyes lit up. "Tiana," he said. "You came back." She nodded. "Can we talk? Outside?" Marcus looked around. The diner was calm, not busy. He nodded and followed her out the back door into the alleyway where trash bins lined the wall and the sun peeked between buildings. She turned to face him. "Is your name really Marcus?" she asked, arms folded. He looked down, then back up. His voice was calm but honest. "No," he said. "It's not." She nodded slowly. "And you don't clean offices either." He sighed. "No, I don't." "Your real name is Darius Mitchell, isn't it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He didn't try to deny it. "Yes." Tiana's heart beat faster. She looked into his eyes. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you come here dressed like someone you're not?" He stepped forward, but only slightly. "Because I wanted to meet someone who didn't see my money first. Someone who wouldn't treat me like I was just a bank account." She stayed quiet, so he continued. "All my life, people have treated me differently because of who I am. They either want something or they pretend to care when they really don't. I've had people smile at me just to get close to my name, not my heart." Tiana bit her lip. Her anger softened a little, but it didn't disappear. "You should have told me the truth," she said. "I know," he said quietly, "and I was going to. I just didn't know when. After our first talk, I felt something real. I haven't felt that in a long time, and I got scared that if I told you who I was, it would ruin everything." She looked away for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. Then she said, "You didn't need to pretend to be poor for me to like you. I liked your honesty, your heart. I liked the person who listened, not the one who made up stories." Darius nodded slowly. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth now. I never meant to hurt you." There was silence between them, heavy but not cold. Tiana finally said, "I need time. This is a lot to take in. I don't know what to think yet." "I'll wait," he said. "Take all the time you need." She nodded, turned, and walked away. That night, Darius sat in his penthouse apartment looking out over the city again, but this time, it didn't feel like victory. It felt empty. He missed the sound of Tiana's voice. He missed her laugh and the way she looked at him like he was just a man, not a brand, not a business, just a man. So he wrote her a letter, a real letter, not a text or email. He told her everything. How his grandmother had taught him to look for real love. How he had lost his way. How meeting her reminded him what it meant to care without conditions. He left the letter at the diner with a single daisy, her favorite flower, something she'd once mentioned in passing. Days passed. No answer. Then one evening, just as the sun was setting, he found a note in his mailbox. "I read your letter," it said. "I'm still not sure what happens next, but I believe you were honest in the end. That matters to me. Let's talk. Tomorrow. Same diner. As yourself." Darius held the note gently as if it were made of glass. Tomorrow he would go. Not as Marcus the janitor, not as Darius the billionaire, but as a man hoping for a second chance. ChatGPT said. The next morning, Darius stood in front of his large mirror holding a plain shirt in one hand and a blazer in the other. He didn't want to overthink it, but he also knew today wasn't just another meeting. It was the moment. He would stand in front of Tiana, not as Marcus, not as the janitor, and not hidden behind any story, just as himself. He chose a simple button-up shirt, navy blue, and dark jeans. No expensive watch, no shiny shoes. Just neat and presentable. Normal. For once, he didn't want to impress anyone with wealth. He just wanted to be seen. As he drove himself toward Sunshine Diner, his heart thumped harder than he expected. The streets looked the same, but everything felt different. This time, he wouldn't walk in with a mop and a bucket. This time, there was no act. Just him. He pulled up a block away and parked the car, then walked the rest of the way. The diner sign buzzed softly, just like before. The door chimed as he stepped inside. It felt familiar now. The scent of warm bread, fresh coffee, and grilled food, in the air. Tiana was already there, seated in the same corner booth where they had first talked. She wore a soft cream sweater and had her notebook beside her on the table. She looked up when she saw him. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked. Darius walked slowly to the booth, unsure of whether to smile or say hello first. He decided to speak. "Thank you for coming," he said gently. Tiana gave a small nod and motioned for him to sit. "I wanted to hear the truth again, this time without the uniform." He sat down carefully, resting his hands on the table, palms open. She looked at him, really looked. "You don't seem so different," she said softly. "I expected you to walk in wearing something fancier. You look normal." "I am normal," he said, a hint of a smile on his face. "At least I want to be." A waitress came over and poured coffee for both of them. Tiana wrapped her hands around her cup but didn't drink right away. The air between them was quiet, but not cold. "I read your letter," she said. "I believe you meant what you wrote. It wasn't easy to forgive you for lying, but I've been thinking a lot about why you did it, about who you are." Darius looked down for a moment. "I didn't come here expecting forgiveness. I only wanted to be honest. If you choose to walk away, I understand." She tilted her head. "Why me? Of all people?" He looked into her eyes. "Because you didn't ask what I had. You asked who I was. You listened. You told me about your dreams without trying to sell them. You talked to me like I mattered, even when you thought I was just a janitor." Tiana softened a little at those words. "That's because everyone matters," she said. "You shouldn't have had to hide to find someone who sees that." Darius nodded. "You're right. I didn't go about it the right way. But I don't regret meeting you. Not for 1 second." There was a silence again, but this time it was easier. Tiana took a slow sip of coffee and then said, "You know what I've been thinking?" "What?" he asked. "I've been thinking that maybe life is like writing. The first draft isn't always perfect. But if the heart of the story is strong, you can still build something beautiful." Darius smiled gently. "Are you saying I still have a chance?" She gave a small laugh. "I'm saying maybe we can turn the page together." They stayed at the diner for over an hour, talking not about money or work, but about little things, books, music, childhood memories. They laughed about the silly moments from their first conversation. Darius told her about the time he tried to fix a leaking faucet in his office and ended up flooding the break room. Tiana shared a story about her first failed story contest and how she almost gave up writing. When they left the diner, the sun was shining brightly. They walked together to a nearby park, one Darius had mentioned before, the one where his grandmother used to take him as a child. As they walked past rose bushes in bloom, Tiana asked, "Did she really plant these?" "She did," Darius said with a smile. "She always said, even in a big, loud city, there should be places where kindness grows." They sat on a bench near the flowers, quiet for a while. The sound of children laughing and birds singing filled the air. "I want to build something with meaning," Tiana said suddenly. "You already are," he replied. "No, I mean something big, like a space for writers, for kids who have stories, but no one to listen." Darius turned to her, his eyes bright. "Then let's do it. I can help fund it. You can run it." She hesitated. "I don't want your money." He shook his head. "Then don't take it as money, take it as belief. I believe in you. I believe in your dream." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Okay, but I get to name it." He laughed. "Deal." Months passed. Together they opened a writing center in the heart of the city. It was small at first, just a few rooms with shelves of books, typewriters, and tables where young writers could gather. But it grew quickly. Word spread. People came not because it was fancy, but because it was full of heart. Tiana ran workshops. She taught kids how to build stories, how to find their voice. Darius came often, not as the guest of honor, but as a quiet helper. Sometimes he brought donuts. Sometimes he just sat in the back, smiling as he watched children, read their words aloud. Their bond grew deeper with time. It was not rushed. It didn't need grand promises or public displays. It grew with trust, honesty, and the choice to keep showing up for each other again and again. One evening, after the last class had ended and the room was quiet, Tiana sat beside Darius at a desk. "You know," she said, "I'm glad you lied." He turned to her, surprised. "Not because lying is good," she added quickly, "but because if you hadn't, I might never have met the real you." He took her hand gently. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." She smiled. "Thank you for earning it." And so the man who once feared he'd never be loved for who he truly was found peace not in hiding, but in being known. And the woman who had spent her life writing stories finally lived one worth telling. A story of second chances, unexpected beginnings, and love that grew not from wealth or fame, but from truth. And every day, in that little writing center, filled with laughter and dreams, their story quietly continued, one honest page at a time.